Mom confessed she hated me, and Dad said I was a mistake. They planned to send me to a therapeutic school to get rid of me. But I had proof. I'm Emma. I'm 16 and have always wondered why my parents treat me like laundry. Since I can remember, they've been good parents. They cook dinner, transport me to school, and attend conferences. But there are no hugs, good night, I love yous, or non-dinner talks. When I was younger, I assumed some families were like that. Practical. Quiet. However, when I was 11, I watched my friend's dad toss her younger sister in the air at her house. They laughed and giggled. Never had I been hurled like that. That's when I saw something was wrong. I questioned my parents about it, but they always said, "We're not performative." Last Tuesday, I found out. I walked by their bedroom to grab water. I heard my dad's piercing, angry voice murmur, "We should have just divorced 16 years ago, I hate living with you." I froze. My mother's voice was weary and resentful. "And I hate living with you too. I hate Emma as well. I hate her. Every time I look at her, I see the mistake that trapped us and ruined our lives." I hyperventilated. My folks loathed me. I stepped away from the door, my heart racing so loudly I worried they'd hear it. My dad said the last line. "At least we're finishing this nightmare, only 5 weeks left." I went to bed and didn't sleep. I had numerous queries. They behaved normally when I came downstairs the next morning. Dad cooked eggs silently. Mom monotonely inquired whether I packed my lunch. It was hard not to burst, but I wanted to understand them. After Dad departed for work, I skipped school and used his laptop. An email to a divorce lawyer was in his drafts folder. I searched with shaking hands. "My wife and I want to separate, but our daughter's finances are complicated. How do we proceed without losing everything?" A protected file on Grandpa's PC contained his will. It was harsh that my birth date was the password. Yellow highlighted. Those who divorce before their youngest child turns 18 forfeit their entire inheritance, $2.5 million per child. They were with me for money. I found a Westside Academy brochure in Dad's desk drawer after searching. Google reviews indicated it wasn't a school, simply a place parents put unwanted kids. Then I noticed messages between them in the plan thread. Mom texted, "I've already met someone new." Dad replied, "Same, can't wait to finally be free." My chest hurt. They planned to divorce me in 5 weeks and date other people for money. I then located the paternity test in a medical secret folder. The exam was 11 years old. Paternity likelihood was 0%. Dad didn't father me. Dad's brother Jason Lockett died. My true father. I shut down the laptop and vomited in the bathroom. After sobbing for hours, I snapped. I wouldn't let this happen. My revolt began with challenging them. That night at supper I inquired, "Dad, did you have any brothers?" He froze mid-shoveling, Mom's fork clanging on her plate. He questioned, "Why?" "Just curious. For a family tree project." "No," shouted. "I was an only child." Mom nodded quickly. I brought their old family photo albums the next day. The person looked like Dad, but younger. Showed at breakfast. "Who's this? He looks like Dad, they could be brothers." Mom took my album. "No one, just a cousin." I discussed my friend's parents' divorce that night. "Do people ever stay married just for their kids?" I asked. Dad dropped his fork. They locked their bedroom door, whispered, and watched me after Mom replied, "That's a silly question, Emma." The night before leaving for Westside Academy, I entered the living room with printed paperwork. "I'm not going tomorrow." Mom looked up from her phone. "Emma, what are you?" I hit Grandpa's will on the coffee table. The $2.5 million bequest. "I know about it." Silence. Dad's face blanched. "Where did you get that?" "I know you're only staying married for money. I know you're sending me away so you can split up." Mom flew off the sofa. "That's not. You're misunderstanding." I dropped the printed paternity test on the will. "I know Dad's not my father." Silence. Mom's colorless face. Dad's hands shook. The doorbell rang. Everyone froze. Dad shouted, "Who is that?" Looking him dead in the eye. "I called your parents. They only found out Jason is my father yesterday." I opened the door and saw Brad's dad looking ready to murder. My stomach fell as I realized I'd stated the wrong name over the phone in terror. I recoiled at grandfather. Dad's father's expression. In 2 seconds his eyes transformed from apprehensive to enraged. He rushed by me into the living room without invitation. Mom and Dad were motionless on the couch, looking at him like ghosts. Grandfather gestured to me and told me to go to my room while grown-ups discussed. Shaking my head hard. They lied about my life for 16 years. I wouldn't leave. Mom leaped from the couch and raced toward me, arms wide. She tried to hug me while stating I misunderstood and they could clarify. Stepping back quickly, I nearly stumbled over the coffee table. I forbade her touching me. She froze as I spoke louder than intended. Dad sat on the couch looking like he was hit in the stomach, shaking hands on his lap. Grandfather's words sliced through the room. He requested confirmation of my phone statements. Did a paternity test prove Jason was my father? Were they going to send me to a facility? Dad opened his lips but said nothing. Mom quickly explained how difficult it was and how they'd been protecting me. Grandfather advised her to quit lying. Walking to the coffee table, I placed the printed will. I added the paternity test on top. Grandfather's heavy breathing was the only sound in the room. He stared at the papers like they'd explode. Mom extended her hand toward the table. I informed her I had 3 copies. She froze and stared at me with a new expression. It seemed like she was performing arithmetic in her brain to remedy this. Dad got up from the couch. First he glanced at the papers, then me, then grandfather. No one spoke for what seemed like ages. Grandfather checked his watch and stated we were ending the talk. It was almost midnight and everyone was too emotional to think. He forbade Mom and Dad from entering my room tonight. His calm voice was unnerving. He stated he was sleeping on the couch to keep me safe until we decided what to do. Grandfather held out his hand while Mom argued. Dad finally spoke up. The wrath in his voice was hardly contained. I was ordered to give him all the documents and reveal their digital whereabouts. No, I said. They could only find help by attending family therapy and dropping out of Westside Academy. Mom laughed. This sour, terrifying sound made my skin crawl. She stated I had no idea what I was doing or all the problems I was making. Grandfather told her to hush. He approached me and grabbed my shoulder. We were heading upstairs, he said. Grandfather advised Mom not to follow us. We climbed the stairs and he followed me to my room. He tested the locks on both windows. They were tested twice. He turned to me with sorrowful eyes. He regretted not knowing about this sooner. He would have intervened months earlier if he had understood what they were planned. He promised to discuss in the morning once everyone cooled down. I should attempt to sleep, even if we knew it was impossible. He squeezed my shoulder and departed, closing the door. His footsteps returned downstairs. Then I heard folks arguing but couldn't understand. I lingered on my bed staring at the wall. My hands shook. I started recording what happened in my journal. My quotes were as accurate as I could recall. I recorded Grandfather's arrival and our upstairs time. I noted how Mom hugged me and Dad wanted the paperwork. I scribbled for over an hour till my hand ached. I then photographed every diary page using my phone. I uploaded the images and document photos to my school Google Drive. The only thing preventing me from breaking apart is knowing the proof was safe in various places. All dressed, I reclined on my bed. I heard Grandfather moving downstairs. I heard a door smash. I watched the ceiling till the sky lit up outside my window. I heard Mom make breakfast downstairs in the morning. Pancake fragrance permeated the vents like a nasty joke. She pretended everything was okay. I dressed and headed downstairs. Mom and Dad sat silently at the kitchen table. Grandfather sipped coffee and watched them intently. Pancake plates were on the table but nobody was eating. I cringed at the phony normality. I took a seat far from my parents. Mom inquired whether I wanted orange juice in a joyful, incorrect voice. I remained silent. I texted my BFF. I asked her to keep on to something vital to me. We planned to give her a flash drive at lunch. Mom grabbed my phone from across the table when she saw me using it. She froze at Grandfather's words. He urged her to leave me. His voice froze her hand. She recoiled and surveyed her plate. Dad cleared his throat to speak, but Grandfather's glare silenced him. I finished texting and put my phone in my pocket. Breakfast ended without conversation. I took my backpack to school. My grandfather offered to drive. Grandfather stopped Dad's protests with a glance. The drive was silent. I lied to Grandfather and claimed I was okay. He promised to pick me up after school. I went to therapy right away when we arrived at school. I didn't check my locker or buddies. I approached the main desk to speak to Larson about a family situation. The secretary picked up the phone after seeing my face. Larson left her office 2 minutes later. She immediately cleared her calendar and escorted me into her office, locking the door. I sat in the chair opposite from her desk and contemplated where to begin. My folded papers from my rucksack were placed on Larson's desk one by one. The will began with the yellow highlighted divorce forfeiting $2.5 million portion. The paternity test showed 0% chance Dad was my father. Last was the West Side Academy brochure, with beautiful photographs of cheerful teens that didn't match internet evaluations. Larson attentively examined each paper without speaking. Her pen stroked her notebook quickly. I watched her face for a reaction, but she seemed impartial. After reading, she put down her pen and glanced at me. She requested that I start from scratch. I told her about overhearing my parents that night, finding proof on Dad's laptop, and the 5-week plot to take me away. Despite shivering palms on my lap, my voice was steady. Larson calmly listened and made more notes. She paused after I finished. She then claimed she had to report this to Child Protective Services since it was severe. My stomach sank. That was probably coming, but hearing it out loud confirmed it. She said proving emotional maltreatment in court was difficult. Parents might be cold and distant without breaching the law, but sending me to a facility without my choice was different. CPS had something substantial to examine given the facts concerning their intentions and money. She stated the report will prompt an inquiry and contact me within days. Though my throat was thick, I nodded. Larson put her phone number on a business card from her desk drawer. She instructed me to text her anytime if I felt insecure at home. I put the card in my pocket. We sat silently for another minute. Larson wrote me a hall pass after the second period bell. I grabbed my backpack and went to class, feeling like I'd done something irreversible. The day dragged. I was distracted in all classes. The talk with Larson and what would happen when CPS called kept replaying in my thoughts. I went to the parking lot where Grandfather was waiting after the last bell. The homecoming drive was silent. I told him school was okay. Strangely, both my parents' cars were already in the driveway when we arrived on Tuesday afternoon. They were in the kitchen when I entered. Mom chopped veggies at the counter. Father sat at the table with his laptop. They both glanced up as I entered. Last period yesterday, Dad closed his laptop and inquired where I was. I froze. I scrambled to think of an excuse. I went to the nurse with a stomachache. Mom glanced around and stopped cutting. She inquired whether I discussed our family business with anyone. She had calm speech but fierce gaze. I answered no with a blank stare. Like he checked my schoolwork for errors, Dad peered at me like he was looking for falsehoods. He inquired whether sure. I agreed and went upstairs. My mom called to say dinner would be ready in an hour. Back in my room, I locked the door. My hands shook. They sensed trouble. They didn't know what. That night, I waited until their bedroom door closed at 11. Packing began when I took my duffel bag from under my bed. Got clothing for a couple days. I had my laptop, phone charger and morning vitamins, even though I wasn't sure how long I'd have service. I copied all the docs on my phone and printed extras at school from my locker. They went in too. After filling the bag, I texted my buddy to drop something in her garage. Her yes came in under a minute. Her mom realized something was wrong and offered to let me stay with them. Reading that letter burned my eyes. My phone in hand, I sobbed on my bed for the first time since the incident. Just calm tears rolling down my cheeks. I wiped my tears and packed after a while. I had to concentrate. I placed my desk chair under the bedroom doorknob in front of it. Then I spotted a rubber doorstop on the hardware shop website on my phone. I purchased it yesterday at lunch and stashed it in my backpack. I tried it by pushing it under the door from inside. No movement in the door. Next I checked each Windows screen. The one beside my bed was easy to remove. The one by my desk did too. I observed the plunge to the shrubs below. Maybe 10 feet. I could do it if needed. Planning escape routes from my residence made my stomach hurt. I put the screens back and got into bed dressed. After hours of staring at the ceiling, I fell asleep. Larson stopped me before first period the next morning. She stated she filed the required report yesterday night. CPS may call me today or tomorrow. She urged me to text her any time if I felt unsafe. Nodding, I slipped my hand in my pocket with her card. It seemed like a lifeline while everything else was falling apart. My shoulder was pressed and she said I was doing well. So she sent me to class. My phone rang during lunch. I answered despite not knowing the number. Female voice inquired whether this was Emma. Yes, I said. Victoria Lewis, from Child Protective Services called. She requested to chat privately. I took my backpack to the library. Lunchtime study rooms in the rear were unoccupied. I closed the door on one. Victoria requested details regarding my home life. I explained all. Conversation overheard, proof uncovered, and planned to send me away. She asked me about my parents' treatment, food, housing and safety. I attempted to sound rational rather than frantic. Her notes and inquiries increased. The call lasted 30 minutes. After our session, she stated I should receive a house visit notification. She praised my bravery in speaking up. After hanging up, I sat there trying to understand what transpired. My phone was out of service when I went home that afternoon to check my texts. The Wi-Fi password was broken when I tried to join. Mom was in the living room, so I inquired what was up. She stated my behaving out caused them to limit my screen time. She pretended to be worried and stated too much internet was bad for teens. Their actions were clear to me. They were preventing me from getting aid. I fetched my laptop from my room, but the Wi-Fi password had changed there too. I was alone at home. The next day, I logged into my email on the school Chromebook during study hall. Larson checked in with messages. I wrote, "My parents cut off my phone and changed the Wi-Fi." She replied instantly to use school computers to communicate. After school, I accessed the public library's Wi-Fi. I created an email account my folks didn't know about. I sent all my proof there. Will screenshots, paternity test photographs, Westside Academy brochure, everything. Personally, I felt like a spy, concealing information and utilizing hidden accounts. At least the proof was safe in numerous places. Late that night, I used library computers to study Westside Academy. Former pupils posted their tales on forums. Kids reported being awakened up by transit services at night. Unknown people who entered their homes and violently pulled them from their beds. Westside resembled a jail. No calls home, no visits, personnel who treated them like criminals. Parents paid thousands to erase their problematic kids. One girl described being driven across state borders in a windowless vehicle. Another said she was restrained and drugged for resisting. Before the library closed, I read story after story. My parents wanted strangers to yank me out of bed and take me away. That notion made me nauseous. I left the computer and walked home at night. I walked to my room and pushed the doorstop back under it when I arrived. No more sleeping without it. Next morning I took a notepad from my rucksack and wrote everything down. 8:47 a.m. Locked parents' bedroom. 8:52 a.m. The corridor outside my room whispers. 9:15 a.m. Mom silently watching me eat breakfast. To hide it, I scribbled the date at the top of each page and carried the notebook in my bag. I removed and added lines if they did something odd. I felt in control, like I was making a case instead of waiting to be sent. I recorded Dad checking my phone during supper. When Mom inquired if I talked to anybody at school and they both fell silent when I entered a room, the notebook filled quickly. Mom came on my door Thursday night as I was doing homework. She sat on my bed without waiting for a response. She had a studied, sorrowful face. She talked about how much they'd sacrificed to keep our family together and how hard it was to stay married when they weren't pleased. She claimed Westside was a great therapy program to help me cope with the divorce. She repeated terribly, unhappily, and difficult decision. Listening to her lie so skillfully made me want to shout. I retreated when she touched my hand. After 20 minutes of pretension, she departed. Dad arrived an hour later. He stood there for a minute before sitting in my desk chair after closing the door. His voice was soft and broken as he spoke. He stated he knew I wasn't his biological daughter when I was 3. His grandfather's will required him to marry and raise another man's child. Despite knowing it was unfair, he was furious at me for 11 years. That whenever he looked at me, he saw his deceased brother and his deceived wife. His apology didn't seem sincere. Sounds like he was exhausted. I said nothing. To say what? With shaky hands, I jotted it down in my notepad after he departed. Larson stopped me before first period Friday morning. She claimed my parents were informed of CPS's Monday afternoon house visit. She seemed serious when she cautioned me they'd probably attempt to make things flawless and advise me on what to say. She advised me to be ready to speak out, even if it was difficult, because this was my chance to tell someone official what was occurring. Nodding made me queasy. My folks went crazy all weekend. Mom scrubbed the kitchen countertops at 7 a.m. Saturday. Dad cleaned the living room twice. They decorated the dining room with flowers and cooked chocolate chip cookies to make it smell like home. On Sunday, they made me sit with them while they prepared their responses like a play. They urged me to say how much they loved me, how happy I was about the therapeutic boarding school opportunity, and how our family was going through a hard stretch but working through it together. Watching them arrange their show made me feel wild. A clipboard-wielding woman with pleasant eyes arrived at our home Monday afternoon. CPS Victoria Lewis. My parents quickly became the perfect worried family. Dad firmly shook her hand. Mom gave her cookies and coffee. In the living room, they answered her inquiries proficiently. Even though they were having marital problems, they cared about Emma. They reviewed therapy programs to give her the best assistance throughout this shift. They were convincing and slick. I felt like I was watching strangers perform. Victoria took notes and asked questions. After 30 minutes, she requested a private conversation. Dad grabbed Mom's arm and drew her into the kitchen as she hesitated to speak. Finally, they left. Victoria softened her voice as she faced me. My true state was inquired. My backpack held my printed proof. Will, paternity test. West Side Academy brochure with bogus therapeutic education marketing. Though my hands trembled, I explained everything. How money kept them wedded. How they intended to send me away to date others and retain the inheritance. How Dad wasn't my father, and they'd lied about it my whole life. Victoria made notes and images of the materials. After I finished, she said CPS couldn't stop my parents from enrolling me in private programs. They had parental rights, but she could label Westside as hazardous and help me create a safety plan if I felt threatened at home. It wasn't my expectation. I believed CPS could stop it. She gave me her card and asked to call if things changed. I discovered Larson in her office before homeroom the next morning. I informed her CPS couldn't stop my parents from moving me away and I needed legal aid, not reports and safety plans. She called straight away on her phone. After 5 minutes, she hung up and jotted down an address. She scheduled an afternoon legal assistance attorney appointment for me. She stated certain cases required more than school counseling and CPS reports, that I needed a courtroom advocate. I boarded the bus to an East Side strip mall after school. Fiona Coleman's workplace was between a manicure business and a tax office. The waiting room contained old magazines and plastic seats. Fiona looked younger than expected, maybe 30, with weary eyes and unkempt dark hair and a ponytail. Her desk was covered in case files and coffee mugs. She listened uninterrupted to my narrative. She thoroughly examined my evidence. I finished, and she sat back in her chair and got silent. She then said, "We might be able to file an emergency motion to prevent residential placement, but I'd need more than documents. Judges don't like overriding parental decisions. I needed witness statements from adults who could verify my parents' threats and my distress, documentation of Westside's actions versus their marketing, and proof that this placement would harm me." She allowed a week to assemble everything. She informed me that family court goes slowly. Judges are reluctant to tell parents they can't send their kids to private programs, and even with excellent proof, this might not succeed, but it was my only alternative. I left her office with a wish list and an impossible deadline. I had 1 week to prove my parents wrong before a judge. The next morning I texted Ms. Larson to write down what she saw when I presented her the proof. Within 5 minutes she said she'd finish it by night. I contacted my friend's mom at lunch to ask her to film the night I asked to hide my bag at her house. She stated she remembers my fear and will write everything down. I knocked on grandfather's house that afternoon to beg him to write about the incident and my parents' will confession. He hugged me and promised to finish tomorrow. My email had all 3 statements by Tuesday night. On 3 pages, Mrs. Larson described my emotions and the documents I showed her. My friend's mom said that I asked to store my go bag and felt scared to go home. Grandfather's account described the encounter and how my parents acknowledged they married for the fortune. I shook hands and sent Fiona everything. Mom came on my door Wednesday night as I was doing homework. Dad followed her in and stated they were worried about my internet use. Dad extended his hand and demanded my laptop and phone. I handed them over without disputing because I'd uploaded everything crucial to the cloud that morning. Dad opened files and clicked about on my laptop in his office. He returned 20 minutes later with this expression. He wanted to know where I hid my files and what I did with them. I just gazed at him until he became irritated and left my room, slamming the door. Mom silently followed him out. They fought in their bedroom about how I was always ahead. I used the school computer to access Dad's email Thursday in study hall. I noticed texts between him and Jennifer discussing apartment seeking and furnishings purchasing. She stated how thrilled she was to start their life together when he got released. After reading, I felt nauseous but kept scrolling. Mother's emails to Arthur were found. After the divorce, they planned getaways and discussed moving in together. While impersonating my parents, they were starting new lives. I screenshotted everything and saved it to my private email. I felt dirty reading those texts, like reading a diary, but I needed the evidence. I received an afternoon email from my grandmother. The headline mentioned Jason. She wrote that she and grandfather wanted to discuss the will and son with me. She claimed they had no idea I was Jason's and were devastated to miss 16 years with their grandchild. Reading it in the school bathroom made me weep so hard I splashed cold water on my face. A female inquired whether I was okay, but I couldn't respond. Just shut myself in a stall until the bell. After returning home, I informed my parents that my grandparents wanted to meet. Dad quickly proposed we have supper at our place this weekend. He sounded happy like we were having a party. No, I said. I promised to meet them in a coffee shop with Ms. Larson. His face looked like I smacked him. He mentioned family privacy, but I left and went to my room. Mom followed me upstairs and attempted to make me hold the meeting at home. But I declined. She gave up and fled. On Saturday morning, I boarded the bus to Main Street Starbucks. A book holding Ms. Larson was 2 tables away. My grandparents came 5 minutes later with a folder. Grandmother held me so hard I couldn't breathe. Grandfather cried. We sat down and he showed us the will with the divorce provision underlined in yellow. He verified the $2.5 million forfeiture. Grandmother stated they will alter the arrangements with their lawyer next week. She stated the will was plainly harmful and they wanted to amend it. Jason and his personality were discussed for nearly an hour. They showed me his childhood images on their phone. Grandfather claimed I had Jason's eyes and grin. After we departed, grandmother told me to contact her if I needed anything. My parents greeted me at home that night. Dad disciplined me for betraying them. Mom removed my house key from my keychain and put it in her pocket. They stated I could only leave the house for school and they'd drive me there and back. Dad appeared at my doorway and promised me they'd watch me closely. I emailed Ms. Galeran that I felt confined at home after they departed. She immediately said to call her if things became worse. Monday morning, Fiona contacted me before school. She claimed she was filing an emergency application with family court to stop my parents from placing me in any residential facility without court consent. She warned me my parents would likely get papers today. She said they would be furious when they found out. My stomach knotted. I checked my phone all day at school, waiting for anything. My parents were served in math class, but I didn't know till that night. They barged into my room when I was doing schoolwork on my bed. Dad was screaming about how I was ruining the family and costing thousands in legal bills. Mom shouted that I'd wrecked everything and they shouldn't have kept me. I buried my phone under my pillow with the voice recorder on. Dad called me an unappreciative error. Mom said I'd ruined their life and wished I'd never been born. The tape lasted 7 minutes before they left my room still ranting. When the yelling grew loud, our neighbor contacted the police. Both cops checked on everyone's safety. Mom's voice calmed when she opened the front door. It was a family dispute about home rules, she said. Dad came down in a decent voice to explain everything was good and their daughter was having trouble. The police wanted to talk. They inquired whether I was safe as I came down. I wanted to scream no, but my parents were there, so I nodded. The cops left after 10 minutes, but one told my parents they were reporting the event. After they left, Dad remarked, "I just made everything so much worse. I went to my room and didn't come out until morning." Victoria Lewis phoned the next morning while I was getting ready for school. She stated CPS advised me to live with a safe family throughout court proceedings. My house was too awful for me to stay. She had a licensed foster home eager to accept me quickly. I had 24 hours to decide to go. My hands shook after hanging up. I packed my luggage that night without notifying my folks. Victoria took me and my belongings Wednesday morning while Mom and Dad worked. I moved in with Sydney Brooks and Ragnar that afternoon. Their home smelled like vanilla candles and had family photographs everywhere. A modest bedroom with a desk and bookcase was shown to me. Sydney said I could decorate freely. That's when I realized I'd never been allowed to create my own area. I always had my old room set up like Mom did when I was 5. People at school on Thursday appeared to know something happened since I moved in with a new family. Inter-class murmurs followed me down the corridor. I kept my head down and did not tell anyone save my best buddy. My horror had become public talk, which I detested. Kids gazed at me at lunch. Some unknown girl inquired if my parents were in jail. I ignored her and ate my lunch in the library. Mrs. Larson approached me after third period and suggested we meet twice a week in study hall for informal therapy. She taught me breathing exercises for severe panic. Despite knowing they broke up my family, I told her I felt guilty. She stated authentic sentiments don't have to make sense. Somewhat helped. Mom wrote me a long message Friday afternoon apologizing for my hurt and hoping I could understand their perspective. She carefully picked every phrase to avoid admitting fault. After seeing it, Fiona claimed it was a classic non-apology meant to appear good in court. She urged me to save without responding. Dad emailed me an old photo of Uncle Jason that weekend. He stood next to Dad during a family BBQ. Dad wrote that Jason died in a vehicle accident when I was 6 months old. He wrote that losing Jason, his best buddy, crushed him. The paternity discovery tarnished the anguish. The closest either parent had apologized was this. I lingered over the shot. Jason shared my eyes and grin. Monday after school, Fiona and I prepared for next week's emergency hearing. She clarified the judge's powers. Except for demonstrable damage, judges grant parents a lot of control. To show the West Side location was punishment, not aid. We had to prove my home safety concerns. She made me rehearse judge-style questions. My grandparents contacted Tuesday night to say they met with their estate counsel. He said they might eliminate the divorce penalty from the will. They filed paperwork to change the terms this week. Parents might divorce without losing money. That ended their marriage, but 16 years of hatred continued. Victoria Lewis informed me Wednesday morning that my parents phoned Summit Ridge, Canada. Enrollment was sought before the court hearing. She was documenting everything to show the judge they were circumventing the law. Knowing they wanted me gone made me sick. The neighbor behind our former house messaged me Thursday night through my acquaintance. She stated security camera footage showed someone approaching my previous bedroom window at 2 a.m. last Thursday. Dad tested the window lock in the video she provided me. I shook hands and sent it to Fiona. The footage of Dad at my window haunted me that night. I replayed it in my brain. While doing schoolwork at Sydney's kitchen table. I went to the shower at 9 but couldn't breathe. I gasped for oxygen like someone was sitting on my lungs as my chest tightened. After sliding down the wall, I sat on the floor with my knees raised. My hands were trembling so much I couldn't grip them. Sydney knocked on the door to inquire whether I was okay after hearing strange noises. No words came out when I attempted to say yes. I was hyperventilating on the floor when she opened the door. She sat next to me and touched my back, but I kept gasping. She contacted Ms. Larson around 9 p.m. On the second call, Mrs. Larson answered and Sydney explained. Sydney put her phone on speaker and placed it between us on the floor. Mrs. Larson's voice was steady. She instructed me to observe 5 bathroom items. I examined the towel rack, sink, shower curtain, toilet, and tile floor. She said. I pressed my palms against the cold tile and felt Sydney's hand on my shoulder, the fabric of my shirt, and the wall behind me. I could hear Sydney's breathing, my own gasping, and water dripping from the shower. I could smell Sydney's shampoo and soap. I kept repeating the exercise for what felt like forever, but slowly, my breathing evened out and my chest stopped feeling tight. After 30 minutes, I could breathe normally again. Miss Larson told me I'd survived the hardest part by speaking up, and tomorrow was just the next step. Sydney drove me downtown to the courthouse on Friday morning. The old building had marble floors and high ceilings that made every sound echo. Victoria Lewis and Mr. Larson arrived a few minutes later with Fiona, who was wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather folder with all my documents. We went inside and I sat in a wood chair behind a table next to Fiona. The judge sat at a large desk at the front of the room. My parents were on the other side with their lawyer. I didn't look at them. The judge, an older woman with gray hair and reading glasses, spent a long time looking through papers while everyone sat silently. Then she asked Victoria to explain the CPS investigation. Victoria stood up and talked about Summit Ridge, West Side Academy, and Dad's window security footage. The judge listened without interruption as Mr. Larson discussed my emotional state and the evidence I'd presented. She explained the will situation and how my parents admitted they only stayed married for money. After everyone finished talking, the judge looked at my parents and stated they couldn't place me in any residential institution without court clearance. She said my interim placement with the Brooks family would last at least 8 weeks while the court examined everything. The judge interrupted my parents' lawyer and said any contact between me and my parents had to be supervised by a neutral third party. She strongly recommended family therapy to address underlying issues. Mom started crying, but it looked fake, like she was performing for the judge. The judge asked if I had any questions. I shook my head. She told me I could leave and that the court would schedule a follow-up hearing in 8 weeks. We all stood up when she left. Dad looked like he'd checked out mentally and was just waiting for this to end. Sydney was waiting with Ragnar in the hallway. They hugged me and said, "I did great." I didn't feel like I did anything great. I just sat there while adults talked about my life. That afternoon, my grandmother's phone rang while I was lying on Sydney's guest room bed. The will amendment was filed that morning and would take effect in 30 days, allowing my parents to split up without losing the inheritance money. She wanted me to know that Andrew's portion would be held in trust for me until I turned 21, regardless of what happened with my parents. She said they were setting it up so Mom and Dad couldn't touch it. I thanked her and hung up, then stared at the ceiling thinking about how money was changing everything. Over the next week, my phone kept buzzing with messages from distant relatives. My aunts, uncles and cousins from big holiday dinners started texting and calling. Some said they always knew something was wrong with my parents' marriage. Others said I'm exaggerating and families go through rough patches, and a few asked nosy questions about the paternity test. My parents stopped attending family gatherings and my grandmother said they avoided everyone because they didn't want to answer questions. Some relatives immediately supported me, while others acted like I was causing drama. I stopped responding to most messages. Fiona called me on Wednesday to explain the paternity situation. She added, "Paternity wouldn't affect custody choices because Dad wasn't my real father and Andrew was gone. Dad had been my legal dad for 14 years. Therefore the court would recognize him as my father regardless of DNA." She stated the paternity test would complicate my case without aiding it. The judge could do something about neglect and residential placement, so I told her I understood, even though I wanted everyone to know the truth about Andrew. 2 weeks after the court hearing, I had my first supervised visit with my parents. Mom and Dad sat on one side of a table and I on the other. They tried to make small talk about school and the weather. Mom asked if I was eating well at Sydney's house. Dad asked if I needed anything. Nobody apologized. The social worker watched us the whole time and said the visit was over after an hour. I left feeling exhausted but relieved that I'd held my ground. They didn't hug or touch me, which I was glad. 2 weeks later, we had our first family therapy session with Cordelia May, whose office smelled like lavender. She had us sit in a circle and set ground rules. We had to communicate respectfully and take responsibility for our actions. No blaming or deflecting. Mom immediately started explaining why she felt trapped in the marriage. Cordelia interrupted her. We weren't justifying previous decisions. Dad attempted to argue the inheritance situation made everything complex, but Cordelia cut him off and focused on the issues. She knocked down my parents' excuses every time. Mom shifted in her chair, looking uncomfortable. Dad crossed his arms and stared at the wall. I mostly stayed quiet and let Cordelia do her job. Back at school I sat at a different lunch table away from the whispering groups. I brought my homework and ate while studying. It was easier than answering questions and staring. My grades improved because I wasn't worried about home. Math made sense again and I could focus on reading assignments. Mrs. Larson pulled me aside one day and said I seemed calmer despite my complicated situation. 3 weeks after the emergency hearing, Fiona called to say the court scheduled a status hearing for 8 weeks out. That meant 2 more months of not knowing where I'd live permanently. Sydney replied, "Most adults never learn to sit with uncertainty. I learned it at 14. Some days felt difficult. On other days, I focused on school, therapy, and supervised visits. My paperwork were in Sydney's guest room in case I needed them again or my folks attempted something else." A week later, Victoria called to say it was time to get the rest of my stuff from the house. She picked me up on a Saturday morning and we drove to my old neighborhood in silence. Walking through the front door felt weird, like visiting a museum of my old life. My parents weren't home because Victoria scheduled it. I went straight to my room and started filling boxes with clothes, books, and the random stuff you collect over 14 years. Victoria stood in the doorway to keep things calm. I opened my desk drawer and found the West Side Academy brochure with its fake smiling teenagers. I tore it in half, then in half again, until it was tiny pieces of glossy paper in my hands. Victoria didn't say anything, but I saw her nod. We loaded 4 boxes into her car and took one last look at my bedroom before closing the door. We unpacked everything in Sydney's guest room. The 4th therapy appointment was on a Tuesday afternoon. Cordelia had us sit in our normal positions and asked Dad if he had anything to say. He gazed at the floor for a long time before answering. He said he saw Jason every time he looked at me and it reminded him of losing his brother. He said he was angry at me for existing when Jason didn't, which made no sense, but grief did that to him. He said he directed all his pain at me instead of dealing with it. Hearing him say it out loud hurt, but it also made me feel less crazy. Cordelia asked how that made me feel, and I said it was validating. Dad didn't apologize, but he stopped pretending I'd imagined everything. 2 sessions later, Mom finally spoke up. Cordelia asked her to explain why she stayed in the marriage, and Mom's body tensed. She said she was afraid of being alone and broke and resented me for making her feel stuck. She didn't say sorry, but she stopped acting like everything was fine. She admitted the marriage was dead for years, and that looking at me reminded her of every mistake she'd made. The brutal honesty felt like progress, even though it hurt to hear. My grandparents invited me to lunch every other Saturday at a diner near their house that served huge pancakes. They brought photo albums and showed me pictures of Jason before I was born. He looked like Dad, but younger and happier. They told me about Jason playing guitar, working on cars, and making everyone laugh. They didn't trash my parents, but they made it clear I was wanted. He would have loved being a father if he'd lived long enough to know about me. That connection to my biological father filled in gaps I didn't know existed. They showed me his high school yearbook and college acceptance letter, and I felt like I was meeting someone important I'd never meet. 6 weeks after the emergency hearing, Fiona called to say my parents had canceled my West Side enrollment and removed their Summit Ridge application. The court order was working. She said their lawyer told them trying anything else would only hurt them in future custody cases. I asked if they could still try to send me somewhere, and she said technically yes, but it would be stupid. She sounded confident, which made me feel safer. I took all my birthday money from my desk drawer and went to the bank with Sydney. I deposited $300 into a savings account in my name, which seemed small, but Sydney said starting somewhere was what mattered. She helped me create a spreadsheet budget and track my spending. She taught me about interest, emergency funds, and saving for goals, which my parents never taught me. We spent an afternoon researching local high schools, and I started thinking about extracurriculars. Planning for the future made everything feel more real and less temporary. Ms. Larson asked me to describe safety during my next check-in. I thought about it and told her I could sleep through the night without wedging my door shut. I told her safety felt like having adults who listened and took my concerns seriously and had a plan instead of just reacting to what my parents did next. She smiled and said that was real progress. 2 months after everything exploded, I lived with Sydney and Ragnar in their guest room, which I decorated with posters and string lights. I saw my parents every other week for awkward, surface-level supervised visits and had lunch with my grandparents on Saturdays to hear more Jason stories. I went to therapy to process everything that happened. It wasn't a happy ending where everyone learned to love each other and everything got fixed, but it was stable and safe. I was building a life where I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was making plans for a desirable future. I appreciate simple stories that remind us of how much we can still learn and develop. If this one triggered an idea, that's the aim.